This episode of Podcast Portugal is brought to you by Revolut Business. If you run a company here in Portugal or anywhere across Europe, you already know how painful old-school banking can be, slow transfers, hidden fees, and endless paperwork. Revolut Business changes that. With a Revolut Business account, you can get lightning-fast international payments, multi-currency wallets, and smart expense management all in one app. And here's the best part. When you sign up using our special link, Podcast Portugal receives €400 as a referral bonus. It's a great way to streamline your business finances and support the show at the same time. So if you've been thinking about upgrading your business banking, now's the moment. Just click Revolut Business in the show notes and get started today. This is Justin West from Podcast Portugal. Before we begin, I want to share something I guess said that really touched me. Dr. Andrew João Carvalho Nunes wrote to say he's a big fan of the podcast. I must congratulate you, as it really is one of the best out there. English podcasts speaking about Portugal. I've listened to nearly every episode. I really want to thank Andrew for that. Coming from a scholar of culture and memory, that kind of feedback means a great deal. It's exactly what this project is about, opening up deep and nuanced conversations about Portugal, its people, and its place in the world. So today I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Andrew João Carvalho Nunes, an interdisciplinary scholar whose work explores Portuguese culture, postcolonial memory, identity, heritage across Portugal, Brazil, and the wider Lusophone world. Andrew, welcome to Podcast Portugal.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me. Very nice introduction. Thank you.
Very welcome. And we could actually kick off with the anglicized name, because I've noticed you spell it Andrew as opposed to the Portuguese version, André.
Yeah. It is actually legally Andrew.
Okay.
So on my birth certificate, I was born in England. So my parents are from Portugal, but I was born in England. And I was given the name Andrew rather than Andre, just to make things a bit easier, assimilate in the UK.
Interesting.
My parents' side. One of the reasons, it's just because I was born in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So England was less multicultural at the time, and for Portuguese migrants in the UK, it's a lot easier to give their kids English first names rather than foreign first names. But the rest of my name is all Portuguese, and you said it correctly. And João Carvalho Nunes, yeah.
And you speak Portuguese, obviously.
Yeah.
And because I'm guessing because of the 80s, the UK. Do you think it's the pronunciation that your parents were concerned about, or more to do with looking upon foreigners suspiciously?
Well, I think, I'm not sure if it's true story, but I remember hearing when I was growing up that there was another Portuguese family nearby, and they were bullied in school or something like that because, but not necessarily because that. Well, basically they didn't speak English; they only spoke Portuguese. They learned Portuguese first rather than English, and therefore, in school it was problematic and so forth. And well, but beside that, I think my older brothers, I have 3 brothers, and my older brothers actually gave my name. Really, they chose the name, really. So, so it's less to do with the parents and more to do with my brothers.
Yeah. I one point is that actually in school, kids, I don't think kids, I think by their nature are not racist, or they're not, they're not against other nationals. I think it's simply down to they just find something that's different about you and want to pick on it and bully you. It could be absolutely anything from my experience.
Yeah, definitely. It's more about how kids are raised and the parents and so forth. I don't have children yet, but I do know that kids do see things differently in a better benign way than adults do, I think. But yeah, at the end of the day, England in the 70s and 80s and things was a lot different than it is now. They're less diverse in certain areas. And
Yeah. And so What drew you? It must be quite interesting because you're brought up sort of anglicized in some way. So maybe that sort of led you to become a little bit more interested in your heritage and Portuguese culture. And is that sort of what drew you into this field?
Yes, I think maybe I'm compensating for being born in the UK. So I ended up going to university to study about Portugal and so forth.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
but yeah, so I kind of went to university a bit later in life, and it was always there in the background, kind of what I really found interesting about Portuguese heritage and music, also Brazilian music and culture as well.
Hmm.
When we talk about the Lusophone world, talk about the whole Portuguese speaking world. So always fascinated by that stuff in the background because I believe you do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or
Yeah, correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I did a different martial art from Brazil, which is not seen as very, very useful, but it's good.
Capoeira.
Yeah, capoeira. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I did
nice.
capoeira for around 10 years
Beautiful.
when I was 16 to about 25. I did that, and we sing like capoeira songs, Brazilian songs,
Yeah, yeah, with a
and
strong
dance around.
African sort of
Yeah,
influence as
yeah,
well, isn't it?
Afro-Brazilian
Yeah.
culture.
Hmm.
So so I was always interested in that stuff, and then I went to study about Portugal, and I come across is nice because I came across capoeira as an academic subject, which is kind of weird that there people are studying this stuff in an academic way. Not weird, but how I'm sure there's scholars in Brazil studying about jiu-jitsu and different aspects of it and
Mm.
society and stuff like that. So it's just interesting. But yeah, because of my background, it was always in the background of what I wanted, what I saw as interesting. And I thought, why don't I study that?
Yeah.
And kind of, be able to be an authority on the topics,
Hmm.
talking about Portugal and so forth.
Yeah.
Um,
Brazilian jiu-jitsu is just, it's quite incredible because there is I don't know how much you know about it, but there's a top guy, one of the most well-known guys is called a young kid called Michael Musumeci. I don't want to call him out on public, but I think he's a little bit autistic. But he also everybody comments like if you ever look at this kid, you would never guess that he's one of the killers of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, because he's very awkward, he's really smiley, he's really friendly, he's really soft and gentle, and yet his skill level is so high that he submits nearly everybody in a few seconds. He's like a world champion. And we also have another kid coming over here to Beja to our academy. He's called João I, another world champion, and he's very similar. He's very, very tiny, very skinny. You look at him, you would think nothing. You think like he's a sort of nerd or whatever. And it's just that kind of culture that's been introduced to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and we still have kind of a little bit machismo going on, but there is this new wave of youngsters coming in who are like. They call themselves like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu nerds, because you just wouldn't guess. And it's just the skill level, and it's the 12 hours of training that they do every day, and the working out all of the movements, and it's like chess. They're like physical chess players. It's
they're
really
taking
fascinating.
that's interesting, yeah, because it looks like I didn't know about I don't know much about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but it looks like they're getting a different sort of group of people to train, and they're probably looking at it more science-based
Yeah,
training.
yeah.
And yeah, that's interesting.
It's fascinating because our son has done it since he's 2, and I do it, and now my wife's joined in, and so it's sort of opened it up to a much bigger sort of community.
I remember, so I trained in the UK with Grupo Senzala, which is based on Rio de Janeiro,
Mhm.
and their master was Mestre Gato, and his son was he was kind of in charge of the chapters in the UK, and so I trained under him, and they would sometimes come over to the UK to do baptizados, baptisms, so
Okay.
where people get their grading ceremonies and stuff like that. And I remember in one of the training facilities, we had an old place. Um, I remember seeing a notice or something because they had, we shared the hall with the MMA guys, and I think there was like an advert for their class, and they say, "Oh, we don't dance around like other groups," and that was kind of a dig at us because in capoeira, people see that it's a martial art, but it's kind of non-contact. So there are takedowns to take your opponent off the floor and things like that. But most of the time, when we're sparring in the Roda of capoeira, we are kind of dancing around doing cartwheels and kicks, and so I don't think other martial artists take it as seriously. Don't take capoeira very seriously, but at the same time, there is a kick in capoeira that MMA fighters use,
I've seen it.
Melu de Compasso, and that's I think that Irish MMA fighter uses it as well. Can't remember.
Conor McGregor.
Colin McGregor. I think he's even used that on on chat shows in America. But so apart from that kick, capoeira is not really seen as very serious as a martial art itself, but it's part of the Brazilian sort of street culture, malandros and malandragem. I can't really pronounce it, but sort of this like street smart culture, and it's just a way of life in Brazil. And if we want to talk about that in an academic sentence, I find it kind of interesting how people they study capoeira, but it's kind of given the agency away from people in Brazil, people in the favelas and so forth, that they know more than some of these scholars in Europe that are studying it, and they should be kind of consulted more about studies on their culture and their martial arts and so forth.
Of course.
But anyway,
I think I don't know whether this is correct in capoeira, but I get a sense that these type of martial arts, in some ways, it could be similar to Tai Chi and these kind of things, where their movements, martial movements or fighting skills, hidden in a different way. So I can imagine that maybe the slaves or whatever in Brazil, they may have developed this fighting style, but they created it with music, and they created it to look more like a dance, to disguise it so that the slave owners or whatever didn't think that they were training in some kind of martial art to fight them.
Yeah, that is correct.
It is okay.
The history of capoeira is it's an Afro-Brazilian martial art, and people like Nestor Capoeira, which is a capoeira master. I'm not sure if he's alive anymore, but he has a book called capoeira: The Roots of the Dance, Fight, Game. So it's like a dance and a fight and a game, rituals. Candomblé, Afro-Brazilian religion is mixed up in capoeira as well, aspects, and Christianity as well.
Fascinating.
And slaves these kind of capoeira came from some sort of dance moves from Africa, and it came with the slaves to Brazil. But there's debates over the because all African kind of rituals and traditions were outlawed by the Portuguese in colonial Brazil. So there's an argument, how could they disguise it if everything was outlawed? But in general, the belief is that it was this culture transposed to Brazil, and it was kind of hidden through the dance, and they kept their sort of culture alive. But this was more prevalent in the quilombos, which were like slave enclaves of escaped slaves and so forth, where they would use capoeira as self-defense. But I'm not a capoeira historian or anything like that, but I did capoeira, and I have a few books on capoeira. But you might have to get someone on the podcast who's an expert on that.
I actually just I'd made myself a coffee earlier, and I was going through all of the subjects and the research that you've done, and by the time I got to the end of the thing, I realized I didn't drink any of my coffee, and it had gone cold already. So I was kind of thinking how to approach our podcast, and I think possibly we might have to do quite a few together just to cover the breadth of your research. And there's so many interesting things here, and I did actually have quite a discussion, let's call it, on Instagram, as you do. I shouldn't have got involved, but I kind of got involved. And it sort of opened my mind a lot, or I wanted to be sort of understand a little bit more about the post-colonial landscape of Portugal, and the sort of the heritage and the colonial times. And you've done a lot of studies on that. And, how do you see Portugal today sort of grappling its colonial and authoritarian past?
That's a good question. I think you're being a bit too generous with your compliments there about how much research I've done and so
Okay.
forth. But yeah, I've recently completed a PhD. So and PhDs are very narrow and niche, and so they're not as broad as thing. And I'm not a trained historian. I focus more on culture, and history is always in the background and plays a part. So your question is, how do I
Well,
see?
actually, we could probably reverse a little bit and just I think we skipped over a little bit about how you got your doctorate and the PhD and where you study and what you study. I think we went straight into an interesting conversation as usual.
Yeah, I know. I think you're passionate about martial arts, so we kind of went that way.
It needs to be about you, not me.
We can. Well, I think we should go back a bit and just and talk a bit more about my background and my family and so forth. So this will relate to contemporary Portugal and post-colonial Portugal if you wanted to go there as well. But just initially, so I was born in the UK from Portuguese parents, and prior to that, I'm sure some of your listeners already heard the name of Antonio Salazar.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So I think at the time, Marcelo Caetano, which was the successor to Salazar in the Estado Novo in Portugal. My parents grew up under the second iteration of the Estado Novo regime, which was kind of exactly the same as Salazar. Anyway, it didn't change. Still, political repression and so forth. And there was the wars in Angola and Mozambique and Cape Verde. From 1961 to 1974. During that conflict, my dad was actually stationed in Mozambique, and my mum's uncle was in Angola, and my mum's brother was in Macau, China. So these were all Portuguese colonies until 1999, and the African colonies until 1974. So this is very common, though, for people in Portugal to have parents and grandparents that actually served in the military in Portugal, because it was conscription during the 60s and early 70s because of the colonial war.
Yeah.
So I have that background there, and also my great uncle from my mother's side was Herminio Martins, who was imprisoned in Cape Verde in the prison camp, notorious prison camp called Tarrafal. Because he participated in a revolt of the Marinheiros in 1936, which was a sailor revolt against Salazar in 1976, and they hijacked a vessel in Lisbon, and so he was a political prisoner. So I have people in my family that try to defend the empire, and then people in my family that tried to oppose the regime. So, but this is this complex sort of like family makeup that loads of Portuguese people have, the diaspora around the world and in Portugal itself.
It's very true.
I'm from the 80s, so people now more have it's more their grandparents that were served in the war and so forth. So, after 1974, the Carnation Revolution in Lisbon, when they overthrew the Estado Novo regime, my dad was still in Mozambique, and my mum moved to London to work for actually it's kind of interesting because so my mum moved to London to work for Lady Ursula Dabu. Her name is Lady Ursula Dabu, which was actually British aristocracy. So she came as kind of like a servant for their household in Kensington, and my dad joined them. A few years later, joined her. And this lady was actually she actually has an autobiography called The Lady with the Widow's Peak, and it's basically because she had this like haircut on the balcony when she was sort of a bridesmaid for the Queen Elizabeth II's mother, when the Queen Mother's, when she got married. So really fascinating how they came to the UK and ended up working for this lady, and then eventually they moved to Cambridge and had me in Cambridge. So hence my accent is very English. But yeah, so that's just a little bit of a background, really, and and that ties into contemporary Portugal. Your question earlier was, how do I see, post-colonial Portugal? Is that
Yeah, it's like sort of how did we, because it's very difficult how we approach history, isn't it? I mean, from a modern cultural perspective, it's like we should be proud about a lot of the things that have happened from a British Empire type perspective, as also a Portuguese Empire type perspective.
Yeah.
There is many positives we should draw from that, but there is also, in a historical context, some things that we probably are not we should be, or I don't know, less proud of. And it's how we approach that in the modern day landscape. You write a lot about sort of difficult or contested sites of memory. For example, like statues. One of the chaps that I was having quite a tough conversation with on Instagram was saying that there was a monument in Lisbon from some kind of I'm not sure if he was a missionary or a priest who was completely racist. And there's a monument to him, and apparently it's very offensive to people of colored skins. I knew nothing about it.
Antonio Vieira.
Exactly. And it's how do we, human beings, we have our good points and we have our bad points. And in a historical context, some of these, looking back in time, some of these things are now not appropriate. Just like if we can look back in time now, 50 years, to how you would express other opinions about sexuality and things like that. And things change. It's how do we sort of encompass that change, but also be proud of certain. Can we distinguish an individual from history, be proud of some things, and also question others?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
This I did it in my PhD. I actually looked at that statue, Antonio Vieira statue, and I looked at statues and monuments that were contested by activists. Most of them, activists were unknown because people that do graffiti and so forth, they're not identifiable because it's just a clandestine sort of act of activism. But it's interesting because the Antonio Vieira statue in Lisbon has been targeted with paint and graffiti at least 2 or 3 times, and the statue was made in 2017, so it's not like an old statue that was inherited from the Estado Novo regime, which a lot of statues have been, like the Prodão dos Descobrimentos in Belém. That was built by Salazar in 1940, and then in 1960 it was made into permanent monument. Those kind of monuments, when they've inherited from they are appreciated as works of art, and they're kept, and therefore the meaning is kind of a bit controversial because it's when it was built and what it represents. But when people are building statues today that evoke that kind of past, various Portuguese scholars in the Portuguese newspaper Publico, academics, I forgot the name unfortunately, but they mentioned how the Antonio Vieira statue is an acronym because it's kind of new but representing an old sort of like language of commemorative language of how we of celebrating the colonial past. The main controversy of that statue is that there's 3 Amerindians, which is Amerindians is just a name for native Indians of the Americas, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So Antonio Vieira is kind of being like this pastoral, paternal figure to these Amerindian children, and it's kind of controversial. But at the same time, Antonio Vieira was someone that did care about Amerindian lives in colonial Brazil. And the same couldn't be said for African slaves. He didn't view them as well as he viewed Amerindians, because he thought the Amerindians could be kind of, you know, their a kind of belief at the time was that the Amerindians were so pure, you know, so untouched by the world, because they were, you know, in the new world, so-called new world, they had this quality. It's a very, you know, hot. It was a very hot topic in 2020, and it's kind of died down now about, you know, these contested monuments and so forth. But Portugal is just experiencing the same problems that the rest of Europe and America has been in the rest of the world, with these people looking at these monuments and challenging them. And you know, Portugal does have a proud history of the descobrimentos, the Portuguese discoveries, and you know, it's difficult to. There is one side that, you know, the Portuguese should be proud of, you know, the first Europeans ever to visit India by sea, and to around the Cape of Good Hope, and discovery of Brazil in 1500. So it's just the other issues that come along with it. Portugal is very complicated. If you look at Britain has museums of slavery, and Portugal only has one in the Algarve.
In Lagos, right?
Yeah, in Lagos, and even that's being criticised of not being adequate enough, because it doesn't really address the history of slavery and so forth. And you would have thought that Portugal would have a slavery museum or something a bit bigger, because
of course it's no longer part of Portugal, but there's one in Angola actually. I saw that the other day. Yeah, it's
you know, but
it's
sorry,
it's very difficult. And I was just thinking then that I think some of these monuments, they represent history. History is not always perfect, just as the human condition is not always perfect. And I think it's good for these symbols to exist, because we can then have debate about them, and debate can be constructive, and debate can be about understanding. You know, we can be proud of some things, but not proud of others, and we can just be realistic. And a debate, it's almost like a reminder of what could happen if certain circumstances go the way they did in those generations. I think if we tore down these statues and we just ignored history, I think that would be detrimental to both arguments.
Yeah, there is an argument that if you were to remove these symbols and these commemorations, these statues and so forth, that people would end up forgetting history.
Exactly.
And therefore bad things that happen would repeat. You know, it's complicated. You know, there is that aspect of history and pride, and I think a lot of people, some people calling for the, you know, dismantling and removal of these statues, and other people want some context, some extra plaques added with some details and so forth. But
that would be nice. Yeah, education is always important.
Yeah, educational.
And it actually, you know, you have these statues in what you talk about in the political graffiti, whether people like graffiti or not graffiti, or whether graffiti should be put on these type of commemorations. But it's almost like it's an expression of an opinion and a frustration. And I'm open to this. I'm open to everybody throwing in their ideas, and as long as we try to understand each other and come forwards in a positive way,
Yeah, I look, from my PhD research looked at this topic. I'm trying to get some more articles published from it, and maybe a book of what my PhD thesis was. But I looked at, the title was Contesting Sites of Colonial Memory, the relationships between interventions, monuments and places. And, I tried to look at it critically and try and see both sides, really, to understand why they've been targeted, what the interventions to these symbols represent, and so forth. Yeah, but it's unresolved debate. It's very, very difficult to unwind and to conclude, really. And Lisbon has recently installed an African statue of an African poet. I'm not sure if it is a poet, but that's in near the Rosio train station in Lisbon. So they are adding and there's the African walking tour in Lisbon.
Exactly,
so there's Afro Portuguese associations looking to highlight aspects of African life in Lisbon and so forth.
Well, it also can go. It can almost sometimes swing too much the other way. Do you know what I mean? Like you can have a sensitivity. It also seems to be prevalent in modern day society, Western culture anyway, where we have a. I'm not going to call it a guilt, but an outward showing of guilt, because I haven't got anything to do with slavery, but and then there can be like an over exaggeration of reparation, and then this can lead to some sort of forms of entitlement, and then you have a reaction from the other side again to that entitlement. And
there's a recent incident about repatriation as well. Basically, during 2020, all the Benin bronzes taken from Nigeria, a lot of institutions gave them back to Nigeria. Cambridge University had some Benin bronzes, Germany and other places, museums and so forth.
Benin bronzes?
They're bronzes. They're sort of miniature figurines and heads and busts of from the Kingdom of Benin in Nigeria.
Okay.
So I'm not an expert on British colonial history, but they were looted by the British Army in one of the punitive exhibitions in the 1800s. Anyway, a lot of those artifacts are being repatriated, but unfortunately, in the rush to repatriate everything, there's been an issue where the museum that's been established to to display these from European that were in European collections, to display them in an African museum in Nigeria. The problem with that is they're going to display clay replicas and not actually the ones that were repatriated, because they didn't realize that the politics and the complexity of issues in Nigeria between former pretenders to the throne and institutions and private family collections and so forth. So I think that touches on what you're saying about it swings the other way, where the intentions of repatriation objects, but now no one can actually see the originals because they've been sent to just be in private collections. So it can go the other way, and it can be
it's so difficult, isn't it? I mean, because it's not it's not the people necessarily as well. I could entertain the opinion that, well, it's their statues and they can do with it what they want, and it's not really up to us to decide how.
Yeah,
but then I'm thinking, when I say theirs, it's like, who is theirs? Is it a ruling tribe or a ruling family, or then you get even more complicated. You're not giving it to the Nigerian people because I'm guessing
that is true.
In Nigeria, there's many sectors of the society and tribal issues and religious issues which make it like, who do we give it to? You know what I mean?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's but I just think it's just it's kind of laughable because it's just a European kind of expectation that they're going to get all the credit for giving it back, and then it's going to be on display in the museum. But it didn't work out like that at all, and it's they don't have to display them if they don't want to. So
Yeah. But it's like who makes that decision, and it's certainly probably
exactly.
not the people. And then it's very interesting, and it's very difficult. And I know that the museums, British Museum, I mean, they must be walking on a tightrope. I know that a lot of Egyptology is very interesting at the moment with people wanting sort of Egyptian art and Tutankhamun statues and tombs and things like that returned to Egypt. And I know that they've probably made a few more sort of better steps in that respect. But it's very interesting, and it's part and part of the culture as we live now. I mean, I'm absolutely inundated with on my Instagram feeds. It's because I've been researching a little bit about sort of Portuguese nationalism. I had a chap on here to interview. I haven't aired the episode yet because it's super controversial. I wanted to get a few other politicians also to interview to balance out his kind of quite radical arguments. And so obviously I've opened my feed up to a lot of sort of nationalistic Portuguese pride and all of this kind of stuff. And for me, I get, I don't know whether it's social media or whether it's, or whether just the algorithm, because I've been shown an interest in the subject. I get inundated with it. We start to get moved. Our theories and our thoughts, we get moved by what we read and what we see, and I find it quite worrying in many respects. And it's some of the reasons why I want to get true intellectuals as yourself who look at both sides of the arguments and try to balance it, because a lot of the time what we have on social media and the news, cultural media, whether it's in the UK or in Portugal, it's not, in my opinion, there's not enough depth, there's not enough nuance, and I think it's worrying, because it's like, what do we teach our kids in school? How do we go about our life? And these things are important, or probably not important at all. That's another thing. Does it really affect your day-to-day life within your small community, these national issues? And should the common man, such as myself, be so worried about it? Does it really affect? I don't know.
It's an issue that affects the whole world right now, of social media and algorithms, and so forth.
Do you think we can pinpoint it to that?
Yeah, this is an issue. As I was saying, that is affecting the whole world, really, with AI and algorithms and so forth. And it's just best to just try and avoid it, because it does stirs up the worst in people. And the world's not as dangerous as it is online, as it appears to be online. And it's kind of ironic, because if you think back to the Portuguese, in the Portuguese past, in the 30s and 40s and so forth, under Salazar's regime and so forth, he was a very conservative person, and you can imagine if there was anything like the internet back then, he would have completely censored it. So he would have had, he would have made sure that people wouldn't be ingesting all this stuff online. So that's the kind of irony, is that a lot of the hateful stuff from the nationalists and people in the Shega party and so forth, stirring up well, even the left bloc and the communists and so forth in Portugal, they're all at each other, trying to score points on each other in social media and so forth. They would it's just something to try and avoid, and people do have reasons to have these feelings about the state of their country and migration and so forth. But I think with an irony as well is that the Portuguese and the Irish, they are some of the most biggest diasporas around the world of migration and so forth. So for people to not like migrants coming to Portugal is kind of ironic considering how many migrants that the Portuguese in Paris. And I don't know if you know about one of the World Cups in Paris. I think it was Portugal versus France, and in the stadium there's more Portuguese fans in the stadium than the French, and
I think that
that's
goes
because
something
there's
to,
a massive French community in Paris.
and also Portuguese are crazy about football. They probably would have gone up on buses to Paris. This episode of Podcast Portugal is brought to you by Flow Sports. If you're into jiu-jitsu, wrestling, rugby, cycling, basketball, and many more sports, Flow Sports have you covered. Stream live events, watch exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and dive into a world of top-tier sports coverage, all on one app. Don't miss a moment. Tap the link in the show notes to start watching with Flow Sports today.
Well, obviously Cristiano Ronaldo is a big footballer.
Yes,
in the world.
Yeah, well, I read somewhere that you made a paper, or you anyway, you discussed the fact that in Goa, they've created a statue of Cristiano Ronaldo, and for the listeners, I'm sure most people know that Goa was a former colony of, or some parts of modern day Goa anyway, were parts of the Portuguese Empire. And it's kind of interesting, sort of like how do these modern cultural icons of Portugal sort of reshape the national memory of what happened in Goa.
Yeah, that was a web article for a Portuguese website that focuses on post-colonial studies, and yeah, I basically did some research about football in Goa and about the statue of Ronaldo, and it's interesting that they have a statue to Ronaldo in a former colony in Goa, and I basically argued that it's a form of neo-colonialism in the sense that it's it's obviously being built to inspire Goan people to play football and so forth, and it was installed in December 2021, so it's a very modern statue. And I guess it's good for tourism and so forth. But the argument really is, and it faced backlash because there are actually there are Goan footballers, maybe not as obviously as famous as Ronaldo. So they could have built a statue of them and inspired their children to aspire to be the footballers in India.
True.
So it's interesting how it's that the local government was kind of like, let's have a statue of a Portuguese footballer. Oh yeah, do you remember this used to be a Portuguese colony? And let's put a Portuguese statue here and so forth. But in the article, I actually have a nice picture of Benfica in Goa in 1960. So the Portuguese have been to Portugal played football matches in Goa when it was a Portuguese colony. So the whole issue of this history of football in Goa about Benfica played sort of matches there and so forth, and how by building a statue of Ronaldo there, kind of just harps back to kind of a certain Portuguese influence in Goa, even when it's no longer Portuguese territory. But yeah, that article is quite interesting. But yeah, it's just a small article about that. But
it's a strong image, and it's quite interesting because I quite like the idea that, like the theory behind the Olympics, that sports kind of is supposed to transcends politics and divisions, because you play along or you play against each other and you all shake hands at the end, and it's I don't know, I quite like the idea of that, and I also like the idea that Goa has Portuguese influences and roots, and to embrace that is kind of nice. It distinguishes the area from other parts of India. It's a nod to its history.
Yeah, it does have it retains the architecture there, and the language of Portuguese in Goa is sadly very fading. Same in Macau. Not many people speak Portuguese anymore there. And it's a statue of one of the greatest footballers in all of all time. that's that's my claim. But so
well, he's so popular all over the world, so he transcends division. He transcends division in many ways. He can be something that we're proud of and we look up to, and because of this, not as a person,
it's true. But it's just how it's like if they built a Ronaldinho statue in London or something like that, a Brazilian footballer, or the other Ronaldo, a Brazilian statue, and put that in London, and Ronaldo's never been to Goa, I don't think, and he's never played there, and so it's just that issue is just a bit odd.
Yeah, it is a bit odd.
A statue of him rather than just maybe just do a statue of the sport of football rather than an individual. So that was the issue.
Well, we definitely shouldn't have a statue of that the Argentinian player, the little guy, with the hand of God. That certainly would be controversial. That would be graffitied on.
Yeah. Well, they build both those statues side by side in Goa. I don't know, but that would it's just an interesting issue, and it was related to my PhD topic at the time, so I just thought I'd look into it.
No, it's fascinating. Yeah. It's fascinating, and I've read that you have a book out which is fascinating, and do you want to talk a little bit about the title of that book? It's super interesting because it's a lot about music and how music affects culture, and we'll actually leave a link in the show notes to the book as well, because it would be really nice for listeners to sort of extend their interest in this subject, because there's so much depth, and I think we were also talking about how social media, you don't get enough depth in things these days, and I think most people are crying out for information and crying out for the time to actually delve into these to longer form information networks.
Well, this book came out in 2019, and this is the revised edition, so I've updated it. And the book is called Portuguese Representations of 1950s American Rock and Roll Subculture, Luso Retro. So in Luso Retro is kind of, is about, the Portuguese as Luso, and if I go into the whole background of the name Luso, if you don't know if you're familiar with Luís de Camões, the Lusíadas, the famous,
Yeah, I just bought my wife the book in Portuguese because she
great.
She's reading it at the moment.
Yeah, so it's very difficult to read in Portuguese and English as well. And it's very famous, loads of different language editions. But in the Lusíadas, that's the Lusíadas are the Portuguese named after what was a Roman Lusitania, which was the territory that Portugal's in now. So I use that word Luso Retro, and the retro is to talk about vintage and retro culture, about 1950s revivalism in Portugal. So in that book, I kind of looked about the obsession people have with the 1950s culture. I'm sure people would have heard of the TV series Happy Days, and the film, the musical Grease, and so forth. So in the 1970s, a lot of people were reviving the past. And this is completely different than statues. This is another type of memory in Portuguese context. But throughout time, people have been copying the 1950s and revisiting the 1950s in cinema. And there's a book by Simon Reynolds, which is a music journalist, music critic, and music expert. In his book Retromania, kind of inspired my book. He looks at how these bands and musicians are copying the past, and he kind of, I believe people like Amy Winehouse kind of replicated the beehive haircut from the 1960s, and
blood of the dance moves, and
and all this culture is kind of not new, and there's the late Mark Fisher, who taught at Goldsmiths in London, who looked at how we're in kind of like dead futures, how there's nothing's new anymore in culture. Everything is just recycled from the past. And I kind of looked at this aspect in the context of Portugal about introspection and obsession with the past, nostalgia and 50s commodification, how the 50s won't be left alone. Because you have loads of revivalists today that dress up in the 1950s, go to music concerts. There's a concert that festivals in Spain and in the UK, in America. They have all these 1950s themed festivals, and they bring their vintage cars and so forth. So I looked at that culture being revived in the present by Portuguese musicians and fashion designers. And then I looked back at the 1950s in Portugal, rock and roll history in Portugal under the dictatorship of Salazar. And then, this involved interviewing certain people. Legendary Tiger Man, Paulo Furtado, which you had on your podcast. I interviewed him for the book.
Shout out to Paulo.
Yeah, he's great. I interviewed him. He's obviously not, he is a contemporary modern rock star, literally rock star.
But he definitely has some 50s, some of the things he wears, and that some of the videos he takes he definitely has some.
So I wanted to talk to him, and I talked to him, and there's a look that he has sometimes where he has a leather jacket and he has a white sort of silk scarf, and that is basically, I hope he doesn't mind me saying that, it to me that is the rockers in the 1960s London, the doing the ton on their motorcycles, cafe races,
the Levi Strauss with the under the bottom of the legs like turned up. I went through all that.
So that kind of looking at. So I looked at people that show that culture in Portugal as well. So
James Dean, was James Dean from the 50s? Was he?
Yeah, James Dean. James Dean.
I can see that kind of look.
I mentioned him in the book as well, and other rock stars from America. So, I can quickly say that what was interesting, which I found out really, is that how rock and roll emerged in Portugal in the 50s and the 60s, and interestingly, don't want to spoil the book too much, but it really actually came from the colonies. So rock actually came. One of the biggest rock stars was Victor Gomez, and he was in Mozambique. And Portuguese Africa, Mozambique had a bigger rock scene than in Lisbon. Because Salazar was cautious of American culture and so forth, even though he permitted jazz music and which is an African kind of Afro-American sort of music genre. He permitted that in Portugal, and rock and roll kind of came into Portugal through artists from Mozambique, Victor Gomez, and it really only emerged in Portugal in 1956, 1958. So you had Joaquim Costa, which was he was considered the Elvis of Portugal, Joaquim Costa. But these musicians were, interestingly, they were doing covers of American songs by Little Richard and Tutti Frutti and Rip It Up by Little Richard. And so they were singing rock and roll songs in English. And if you look at Paulo Furtado today, he sings in English. His music's in English. And it's kind of interesting how these Portuguese musicians sing in English. And you can ask me questions about the book, but I quickly just say here that Coimbra has a big Portuguese 50s scene, and there's cafes and restaurants in Lisbon as well, and that have this sort of aesthetic of the 1950s, American 1950s. But it's interesting because it's American 1950s culture, not Portuguese 1950s culture. So it's as if they're ignoring that past of the Portuguese 1950s because, it was the dictatorship and so forth. But it's a 1950s culture from America, which is
sort
really
of
interesting.
reinventing their own history in certain respects of that era.
Yeah, so I kind of looked at the questions I kind of had for these people were like, are you nostalgic for the 50s? The Portuguese 50s or the American 50s? And ultimately, I won't say no more because I'll spoil the book. But you have to find out what the kind of why they were recycling the past, why they're recycling an American past rather than a Portuguese past.
But I could probably interpret it a little bit from just what we've been talking about now, that I would imagine that if there is a part of your history you're not so proud of the political landscape, you would perhaps want to romanticize another history of what that history stood for, and the freedom of expression, and the freedom of outward expression, of the way you dress, the music, and partying and getting together. I think that would be something that they would want to be celebrating. That's interesting.
I should mention there is a book. There's a record store in Lisbon called Groovy Records.
Right. Yeah.
And they authored a book called Portugal Electrico Contra Cultura Rock 1955 to 1982, and that's a good book by Edgar Raposa and Luis Futur, which helped me in my research as well. So I should shout out to them, because that's a really good book with this history. So if anyone's in Lisbon, they should go to Groovy Records, and they actually have on the wall the original 1950s LP from Joaquim Costa. Nice. The original pressed LP from literally the first ever rock and roll record, proper rock and roll record in Portugal, is in display in the shop. So that's worth seeing. But
because you studied Fado as well under the Salazar dictatorship, and and the regime kind of thought of that as an appropriate cultural expression. And do you think that still lingers in today's cultural politics, though?
Well, Fado is still, it's a really popular music. There's a musician, Carminho, just had an album come out on Friday, which is a big Portuguese fadista. I studied Fado under Salazar as an undergraduate. I didn't really study it later on, but it is, if we relevant to the book, in 1950s, Fado is the kind of like the music that the regime is associated with, the Portuguese regime. So, after 1974, Amália Rodrigues, which is the Queen of Fado, she got massive backlash in the post-revolutionary period because of her association with Fado. But I believe I read that Salazar actually didn't like Fado music necessarily because it actually put the Portuguese in a melancholic state, and he actually didn't like that because nothing can get done properly if everyone is all sad at the time. So so people do associate Fado with the former regime, and that it sometimes not anymore, but they used to, in the hot period after 1974 when they're trying to transition to democracy, Fado had a massive backlash, but Salazar wasn't necessarily all about Fado, so to speak. But it's still relevant today. It's still it's a very touristified, commodified music genre that is great for tourism, but also it's not just about that. It's a very important cultural legacy from Portugal.
It does have some nationalistic, not like I say nationalistic, but it has some national pride in there, I guess, is what we could call it now. And
yeah, of course. It's entwined. It's entwined in Portuguese. I have a Portuguese guitar, which I have the Coimbra model. There's two types. There's about three types of Portuguese guitars. There's the Guitar Portuguese, the Coimbra version with a teardrop, which only men can sing in Portuguese, Fado and Coimbra, because it's related to the students, and it's more about love songs to female students.
Okay.
So and they wear black capes that's the Coimbra kind of style, and then the Lisbon guitar has a scroll on the top of the head, and that can be sung by women and men. But it's there's a really interesting band at the moment called Espresso. Let me just think of the name, but it's a really new band that has rock guitars that mixes Fado guitar as well.
Okay.
And called Espresso Transatlantico.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah,
yeah. So the Portuguese guitarist in that band is actually I believe it's Amalia Rodriguez's sister's grandson or something like that. So he's literally Fado royalty.
Wow.
But he's really good, and he's friends with Madonna. So he's been working with Madonna and stuff like that. So he's really young, and he's doing really interesting stuff. So, the Fado music has moved into contemporary uses as well, into with electric guitars and drum sets and so forth. There's Dead Combo is a really famous example of that, of Fado guitar and sort of like its American Western sound, which the Portuguese do that really well. This sort of American sort of Western desert, Joshua Tree sort of like vibe. But yeah, Fado is it's not really tied to nationalism anymore. It's just a national song, really.
Yeah, it's a symbol in many ways. Yeah,
stuff like that.
Yeah, it's just it's so interesting how Portuguese culture is sort of lingers in many. I don't know if you know much about the Hawaii, the influence of the Portuguese in Hawaii. It goes all through their language and everything. Now I don't remember exactly what they say, but there is a derogatory statement that Hawaiians, modern day Hawaiians, call each other, and it's something to do with being related to being Portuguese. And this, and this stems from 70,000 Portuguese immigrants moving to Hawaii to work on the sugar plantations, alongside native Hawaiians and alongside, I think, Chinese as well.
There is Portuguese diaspora do have stereotypes, and there's a famous film. There's a really good film. There's a French and Portuguese film called The Gilded Cage, and it's about a Portuguese family in France, in Paris, and the husband is a construction worker and the wife is a maid, and this is a modern film, but there is a stereotype of Portuguese people, like the men being construction workers and the women being sort of like domestic, like cleaners and kitchen workers and so forth. But yeah, I didn't know that about Hawaii. That's
it's fascinating. I mean, and literally what it was, and the reason for the derogatory statement from the locals was because the Portuguese tended to get promoted quicker with the landlords, and then became the sort of foreman of the plantations, and so all the other workers were like, the Portuguese like this, and Portuguese culture sort of, even with the guitar, that you have the Hawaiian ukulele, stems from the original cavaquinho, which is a Portuguese style small guitar.
Yeah, the small guitar. That's really big instrument in Brazilian samba as well. In Brazil as well, the cavaquinho.
Yeah, and I didn't know this at all, and I actually realized that I have a few friends, some surfers from Hawaii, who are friends, and I realized I'm recognizing all their last names actually, and now sort of very, very Portuguese, and I was like, okay, now I'm understanding. Yeah,
I think that Portuguese legacy is not really well remembered or known because of how Americanized Hawaii has become.
Yeah.
Later on, as American sort of an imperial power, dominating sort of like, Puerto Rico is technically America. It's not. It has its own flag, but I think they have access. So a lot of the famous Americans are from Puerto
tax
Rico,
exile,
and
I think.
yeah. So it's kind of this sort of like, after European empires sort of collapsed, America became an empire. And Neil Ferguson, a Scottish historian, he talks about America as a colossus of empire, and how it invaded the Philippines and
Well, I think
and Hawaii and so forth. And
they almost had it as an invasion of ideas, almost an invasion of culture, because we were talking about your book as well, the Lusophone. It's like the message of democracy and freedom and their political aspirations
But
were
in the context
promoted.
of Portugal, though, rock music, is kind of a soft power. I'm sure that's what you are saying. But interestingly, no rock stars from Portugal, no rock stars from America ever toured Portugal, and somehow rock music came to Portugal through Portuguese interpretations and so forth. Eddie Cochran, really cool. People. I argue that. Well, I kind of believe Eddie Cochran was a better rock star than Elvis Presley. But he died in England, in a car crash, and so England had all these rock stars like Gene Vincent, Vince Taylor, Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly. I don't think Buddy Holly went to the UK to England, but all these rock stars, they toured Europe and they went to England, and Portugal never had any of that. Salazar was cautious of American culture. So, like I argue in the book, is that how rock music kind of came from the Portuguese Africa into the metropole, through because they had rock concerts, and even during the colonial war in Portugal, there's loads of Portuguese bands that were formed in the army. Soldiers brought their electric guitars. They had bands during the war. And it's just really fascinating. So I recommend people check out the book if they're interested in rock and roll history. And if you're not interested in rock and roll history, there's still a lot of history about the Portuguese dictatorship. In chapter 2, there's a section called the Still Estate, the same thing for 48 years, and how the regime controlled Portugal in a sort of 48 years. How it repressed student rebellion and stuff like that. And I look at how rock music was involved in rebellion, and I'm sure people know about some of the listeners, if they've been listening, they probably heard about songs that were involved in the revolution, in the Carnation Revolution, and censored songs. I can't think the name there. What's his name? Zeca Alfonso, and some of his songs were banned and so forth. And he's not rock. His music's not rock and roll. So it's interesting how rock and roll in Portugal wasn't really subversive.
Yeah,
it wasn't like a moral panic as it was in America as much. But yeah,
it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, I went to an American school when I was a kid, and sort of we grew up on American culture. We lived in Saudi Arabia, right next to Aramco. So we had we had a cinema, and we were allowed to watch one movie per week. We had one TV channel which was all American TV. Like you were saying, the Happy Days or the Fall Guy and Knight Rider, and so I just had American culture from a young age, and yeah, super interesting how powerful it is, and it sort of definitely spreads. Hollywood as well spreads that sort of message of the good and the bad, and the right, the wrong, and then freedom of expression for good or for worse.
But this this American culture was more prevalent in Portuguese Africa than in Portugal, and that's why I argue in the book is the drink Coca-Cola is a very American product, isn't it? And Coca-Cola was banned in Portugal, but it wasn't banned in Angola and Mozambique. So people in Portuguese Africa, they had access to American culture, food and drinks, and exchanges with American sailors that were traveling. in the dockyards and so forth. And so they had this accessibility to American culture more than in Portugal. So it's just really interesting how, this phenomenon rock and roll kind of came to Portugal through Portuguese Africa. There were stars in Portugal like Joaquim Costa, but Victor Gomez, is regarded, the king of rock and roll. He kind of dressed up like Gene Vincent in leather with a chain, and there's a guy called Vince Taylor, who was a British rock and roller. He looks like Gene Vincent and Victor Gomez as well. So Victor Gomez kind of based his look on them, and then he come to Portugal and he kind of took over the rock and roll scene for a while. But unfortunately, these artists are not really remembered at all in Portugal, and they're not recognised enough. I think Paulo Furtado made an effort to kind of to get their acknowledgement recognised in Portugal, but more needs to be done really.
Yeah.
Because they are literally part of Portuguese music history, and people just think about 1980s rock and roll in Portugal because that's when it kind of really exploded. But there was rock and roll long before them, as far back as 1957. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, and what I find as well nowadays is that I'm interviewing more and more, and I'm speaking to a lot of people. A lot of the listeners of the podcast are people who've left America for whatever reason, and now they're moving to Portugal and appreciating the Portuguese culture. Do you think there's a sort of sign that American culture now is either is exasperated or it's in decline as an empire or as a cultural influence, and people are starting to poke at the cracks of the culture of the US sort of culture? And I don't know, it seems like since the period of time that you were talking about, it feels to me like now the culture in the US is going through a little bit of a struggle, and I don't know whether this is a sign of decline or whether this is just a normal reaction. But I am seeing a lot of people that are coming here to Portugal wanting to get away from it, let's say, or at least because they feel they share the more Portuguese values of what we have.
Because so it's very appealing, and it's the first European country to the Americas, really. So it's if you're flying to America, or especially if you're flying to Brazil, South America, you stop off. If you're flying, you stop off in Lisbon, and then you get a transfer, and you transfer over there. It makes the flight a lot shorter, a bit shorter. Yeah. So I think it's just it's just a choice, and obviously, if you have money in America, you can kind of live a bit more comfortable in Portugal. But obviously that's having a lot of backlash with different enclaves, and it's always an issue about integration, and all European countries and have problems with integration and stuff like that is a big concern. But I hope to move to Portugal one day.
Okay.
Go back, whatever. I've always felt like my soul is in Portugal, it's not in England.
Yeah.
Even though I sound like this with my accent.
No,
but
I'm very familiar with that feeling. I don't believe that. I don't know if it was my upbringing in the Middle East, and I went to a boarding school in the UK when I was like 11. And it was horrific. It was just like, what is this? I'm in a dormitory of 25 kids. It was like freezing. The windows were freezing. It's no central heating. No love, no affection, nothing. And I sort of realized that I love being in Saudi. I love returning for the holidays and the warmth and the sound of the mezzanine. The swimming pool, all my friends and family, of course, there. And I feel like Portugal, I found a kind of nice mix between the family values, the warmth, the sunshine, the going to the beach at the weekends, and for me that is sort of my life, and the family values and all eating together, and which I didn't really have in the UK. My memories of the UK were the opposite.
Yeah, I do think you kind of painted a picture there of England being kind of cold and and so forth. But I think Portugal has that family kind of values and the family um it's a different culture, and I think it's a better culture. It's better for community and so forth, and Portugal has that mix. There's certain Portuguese words that have Arabic origins, and because of the history of the Iberian Peninsula with the Moors from North Africa, and you see that architecture in Granada, in Spain, and in Portugal, and is that mix of the weather, and obviously it's cold in the north, and
Yeah,
I'm
it's
I'm
small
I'm
things as
familiar with.
well. Like food, for me, food is
Yeah.
really important, and I'm also a surf coach and stuff, and I spend a lot of time spearfishing and the coast, and the fish, and we grow vegetables here on the farm. We have olive trees, and I don't know, there is just something about it that I lived in Cornwall for a long time. I had a vegetable garden. I worked as a sheep farmer, and I just remembered always wanting to go on holiday just to find sunshine. Now that it kind of seems like a foreign concept to me now, because I don't even think about the weather or the sun, but it could even just be as simple as that, like the feeling you get from the vitamin D or the sun exposure on your skin. I'm sure you feel like that sometimes. You just want to feel a little bit of sun.
I mean, if you talk to a lot of Brazilians, a lot of Brazilians like European, they love the cloudy weather, or they love the sort of they love winter time in Europe because of snow and so forth, because they're used to such hot weather. And it's kind of fascinating that someone from a different part of the hemisphere would really love a day that is cloudy, and it's like I can't understand that coming from England, but for me it's I don't know if it's my biology or whatever, it's just my heritage. I just feel like I need to return back to Portugal one day.
It's a Portuguese state. You have saudade. You have a longing to return. You're a sailor out on the seas, looking forward to coming home to port, to the warm embrace of Lisbon.
One day. Well, they that's that kind of reminds me of the dynamic between England and Portugal, with the the Vasco da Gama and all these Portuguese navigators were part of the illustrious generation, according to Lewis de Camões, and how Philippa of Lancaster married Alfonso the second, I believe, and so you got some of the national heroes of Portuguese are half British blooded and half Portuguese blooded. So
you also have it's Catalina, Queen Catherine, I think. I'm not sure which Henry she married, but one of the Henrys. And she was, she was a character, like wearing trousers. She apparently brought the tradition of drinking tea in the afternoon to the UK.
Yeah, Catherine Braganza, I think it's Charles II.
Charles II, okay, yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, we've had a close link, and we still today that's recognized here in Portugal, the links between the UK and here. I mean, I always found in the UK that I always found it very strange that I wanted to buy land, and or you have a house and you have something called a leasehold, a 99-year leasehold. So the land that your house is built on is actually owned by somebody else, that you pay for a 99-year lease. It seems irrelevant in some, because you're not going to live more than 100 years. But the fact that you can't, the land is actually owned by gentry or aristocracy, or now duchies, or probably sort of now, multinational companies that are probably where they have their base in some Caribbean country. But I found like in the UK, it feels very much like you're controlled, not in a negative way, but I feel like there's a power structure there, and it's very ingrained. And there is opportunity. There is a lot of opportunity in the UK for middle classes, for working classes to succeed. There is, if you work hard. But I feel like it's very difficult to sort of break through certain echelons of society there, which I think in Portugal I find there is a lot of opportunity here. There is opportunity. The opportunities here are almost endless. You have to put up with a lot of bureaucracy. You have to but there is stuff here. I'll give you an example. We were looking for a facility for the podcast, and Beja is in the Alentejo. It's a what they would probably classify as a deprived area. It's a lot of agriculture. There is a lot of the youth have moved out of Beja. They'll go to Lisbon or Porto or whatever or the Algarve to find work, and so you have a lot of bigger old generation here, and a sort of a lot of migrant workers. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to invite people to come back. Now, there's a sort of a directive to try to encourage people to move back to the area, to move back to Alentejo, to the surrounding towns and villages. And we went to visit this amazing association of empresarial. It's an association of businesses, and it's an organization set up to try to encourage, people like me, and my wife, who's Portuguese, try to bring sort of digital technological businesses into Beja, into this sort of semi-deprived area for this type of work. Anyway, we had this meeting and we got shown around this facility, and it was absolutely amazing. It's a co-working space. They have office spaces. They have, like an auditorium. They have all these exhibitions, and there was 2 people in it. There was 2 people using this facility, and I was like absolutely gobsmacked, because if you had this opportunity anywhere else in the world, it would be snapped up. So of course we snapped it up, because it's a really cool space, and I feel there's a lot of opportunity here in Portugal, and I think if you do come, you should think about moving to Beja.
I'll say hi if I do.
Yeah, exactly.
But you mentioned about the leasehold thing. I know I'm based in Cambridge, and the Cambridge University owns the land in various places, and you have a science park that are paying rental to Trinity College, for example. And it's like these businesses are rich and reasonably rich, and the universities owns the land that these businesses are built on, and they're just earning that residual income through that. So and I think so that is an issue in England. But you mentioned there is bureaucracy in Portugal. There's probably more bureaucracy in Portugal than in the UK. And I think we mentioned about Americans moving to Portugal, and I'm sure a lot of them are getting frustrated and annoyed with that. But it's just a slower pace of life, and
I agree with you. I think it's also possibly because we had the revolution. A lot of all of this sort of big land ownership got broken up. It got sort of, for good or for worse, for good or for bad, it got sort of dismantled in many ways. So you can sort of own your own. There's a lot of properties around here that sort of derelict, and I'm always wondering why is nobody renovating these properties? And it's because they're owned by several different generations they're owned by a whole bunch of people that's been inherited, and they don't quite know who owns which piece of land. And because of the revolution, a lot of it was a lot of the paperwork got burnt, and who owns what. And I don't know whether this creates in modern Portugal like an opportunity.
There is. You're right. There is a lot of property vacant, and my parents are from Lausanne, in Portugal, in the Coimbra district, and there's loads of empty properties there. the thing is there's not much to do there for young people,
Exactly.
and so they all move to the bigger cities, and there's opportunities for people to come and invest and so forth, but it's a big gamble, isn't it, when you're going to take on a property and trying to renovate and so forth, and this is not something I've had to deal with.
Yeah.
So I can't really speak much about it, but it is there is a ridiculous amount of empty properties, and for example, there's buildings in Lausanne that have been empty like my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm 39 now, so I remember being a kid, and you see this nice sort of like colonial mansion style.
Yeah.
This mansion, kind of a big house, in Lausanne, and you go there as an adult, and it's still empty,
Yeah.
and no one's bought it, no one's renovated it, and it's
like in the UK, it would be sort of bought up by the
in
National
the UK,
Trust or some other organisation. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, but
Interesting.
another example is there was a train line from Lausanne to Coimbra, and that train line was great. People would live in Lausanne and they would commute to Coimbra for work, and then they got rid of the train. They got rid of the train line and the train station, and everyone had to take a bus or drive to Coimbra from Lausanne. But now they have a guided bus. It's not completed yet, but it's so they removed one of the lines, like Coimbra A, Coimbra B. There's two lines, so they converted Coimbra A into the guided bus route. So it's going to be great when it's finished, but it took so long, and it was like this half-built bridge, and it was never finished, and the money runs out, and they start projects and never finish it. But hopefully, when it's done, it'd be fantastic. But I think when they have that line fixed, that bus route, the guided bus route, Lausanne will benefit as well. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lausanne.
No,
but
not at all. No.
Do you know the drink liqueur beirão?
No.
The drink?
No.
I'm sure you've come across it. It's Portuguese liqueur. Portuguese.
I've been here for 14 years, and I'm discovering things every week about Portugal, which
but this is
classic.
All the airports sell it, so you might have come across the logo.
Probably. But
liqueur beirão is a Portuguese liqueur. It's the liqueur of Portugal.
What do they make it from?
A secret ingredients.
Okay.
So, but my grandmother actually was approached by the company one time, because they are based in Lausanne. That's why I mentioned them. And I think one of the secret ingredients is, I'm going to spoil it for everyone, I think is a plant, this sort of blue flower plant called iris, or something like that, because my grandmother had loads of them in her garden, and people from the factory wanted to take all the flowers from her. They paid her for it, I think, or she just gave it to them. But since then we think that's one of the ingredients to make it sweet.
Okay.
But it's a sort of golden liqueur, and it's liqueur beirão, which is named after the region Beirão.
Okay. I'll have to try it.
So your listeners, if some of the Portuguese listeners might know that, but it's from Lausanne, and that's something proud Lausanese people are proud of, I guess, to have that drink. Yeah. It's all in the airports and stuff like that, so it's something tourists will come across. So
I mean, we're always discovering Portugal. Like I don't know Coimbra that well. I know the university there and that kind of stuff.
It's the Oxford or the Cambridge of Portugal, really, and in the past, all the politicians and presidents studied there. So Salazar studied there, economics. But it's interesting though, isn't it? The students wear the gowns, the black gowns, and so forth. And Coimbra is one of the most famous ones. It's emblematic. You see students wearing those gowns and so forth.
Yeah. It's fascinating, and he's got a very strong history in in Portugal. I think a lot. You find a lot of people from the north of Portugal often sort of. I'm not going to say that they think they're true Portuguese, but they come from a different. They come from a different genealogy. You could probably say they come from a different historical. I think if you go down to the Algarve and if you go Alentejo, there's quite a lot more influence from the Moors, and also from
true.
the Lusitanians we were talking about, sort of the Roman, and also some groups from Mesopotamia, I think, sort of Mediterranean influence. And I think if you go up north through the mountains and through the hills, there was more. There was actually quite a strong Celtic influence here in Alentejo, but also as you go slightly further north, there was quite a lot of Celtic influence, and there was another Germanic tribe I don't remember, but it's quite fascinating to see the mix of different cultures here. From
Coimbra used to be the capital of Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think Coimbra Portuguese is supposed to be. You know, like how in England you have the Queen's English. I think it's Coimbra Portuguese is supposed to be the correct way to speak Portuguese.
I'm not sure. Yeah, there is different accents in the north, and so I find the north accent easier to follow, and Brazilian Portuguese is quite easy. Is easier to follow as well. There's different accents everywhere.
Yeah.
But
Algarvian. Alentejo is actually quite easy because it's much slower. It's a little bit more. It's not so fast. My wife, she's from. Well, she originally, her family's from Alentejo, but then they all moved to Lisbon as you do. Her parents moved to Lisbon when she was 4 or something like that. So she was pretty much brought up in Lisbon. So when she speaks 100 miles an hour. I have no idea what she's talking about most of the time. I have to ask her to slow down a little bit. But I can understand Alentejano a little bit easier. And Algarvian I can understand a bit easier. But I don't know if you've been to the Azores, but that is quite difficult for me to understand.
Yeah, I haven't been to the archipelagos, the islands, no.
Yeah, that's a whole nother interesting subject. Well, I think Andrew, what I want to do is I definitely want to have you on again at some point in the future, and so keep in touch. And
no problem.
I'd love to continue these conversations because I think it's important that we, in these long form discussions, that we have somebody who's done the research, rather than me that's just spouting a lot of nonsense. But thank you. Appreciate your time so much. And we're going to talk about where people can buy your book, I think, the most recent book. And the link I'm going to leave in the show notes. But we can also spell it out here as well.
Well, it's published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing. And you'll have a link so people can just follow that.
All right.
But it'll be in academic libraries and so forth, where you could order it online. But
you can order it online as well.
Thanks for having me on, Justin. It's been great.
Yeah,
great chatting with you.
More than welcome. And I look forward to another book, and I look forward to you moving to Beja and being neighbours. Okay, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This is Podcast Portugal. Voices of Portugal. Stories for the world. Signing out. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Out.
Under the rock, I'm gonna dig a hole and hide all my magazines. All the spots are not obscene. I just need some time, some focusing. I got the pen, I got the sheet, I got my plan, I got my screen. Someone tell me, please, there is a need to stop playing Baldur's Gate 3. 1, 2, 3, we're living on a rock, living on a rock, living on a roller coaster. 365 per year, living on around in a muffin chocolate. I need to concentrate, stop this train of thoughts, or I will be crashing on a couch.